I'm Dan Holt, the U.S. Senate Associate Historian, and this is The Elephant in the Room, Halloween edition.
Ooh. Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. I'm your host, Cyrus Pearson.
I'm your co-host, Carly Rapp.
And we have for you today a special bonus Halloween episode. Normally we bring you nothing, absolutely nothing between our normal episodes. Since Halloween is coming up, Carly thought maybe this would be a good subject. What kind of things do we cover in this?
One of my favorite things we covered was that the Capitol back in the day was utilized as a hospital for wounded Union soldiers.
Super cool. I'm particularly big into the ghost cat or demon cat, so I was happy to hear about that. We talk about the Congressional Cemetery and
the Bloody Staircase.
So stay tuned. You're just about to hear all the creepy stories go down from U.S. Senate Associate Historian Dan Holt. Dan Holt, Associate Historian of the U.S. Senate. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And first off, your credentials. We talked to Betty earlier on an earlier episode, and she was great. How long have you been up here?
In January, it will be 8 years.
Oh, okay. And our first subject, have you witnessed any deaths at the Capitol?
If I had witnessed deaths at the Capitol, I'd probably be in therapy rather than talking to you all. No, I have not.
This is our special bonus Halloween edition, and it could get a bit morbid. We're going to talk maybe a little ghosts, maybe little demons here, but Carly, why don't you kick it off with one of your passion subjects for some reason?
Deaths at the Capitol.
I
mean, it's interesting. You never know what you're going to hear here. What do you think has been the strangest death in the Capitol?
I don't know about strange, but, they're all of them rather tragic in their own ways. If we go back, one of the deaths that I've read about was a young man who leapt off of the top of the Capitol Dome in 1875 and landed on the roof of the Capitol, which was very unfortunate. There's also been construction accidents going all the way back to the building of the Capitol in 1808. Henry Latrobe was the architect who designed the Senate wing of the Capitol, and his assistant, John Lenthal, was putting the finishing touches on that beautiful vaulted ceiling in the old Supreme Court chamber, and he took down the supports too early, and sadly the ceiling collapsed onto him and killed him.
Wow.
Another work-related one.
Now, before you move on from that one, Carly had done some research. Is there any possibility that he cursed the Capitol with his dying breath? I don't know where that comes from.
That does turn up some places. I doubt it myself, mostly because I think he was literally buried under the rubble and probably wasn't saying anything.
This is just going to be us being wrong a lot, I think, you correcting us.
Well, I'm a natural skeptic, so, we'll see.
Okay. I was scared to ask you if you actually believed in ghosts, because I didn't want you to say no. You can't deny UFOs, though, can you?
Apparently not now.
Not now.
It's official.
So people dying on the Capitol grounds is not uncommon.
It's less common than dying other places, I guess. But there have certainly been a number of deaths in the Capitol. I didn't mention some major statesman who passed away, John Quincy Adams, former president who was...
Yeah, tell us about that.
John Quincy Adams had been the president of the United States for a single term. After he lost, he served in the House of Representatives for many years, where he really cemented his reputation as an foe of slavery. And he worked up until his dying day. He had a stroke at his desk in the House chamber, which is now we use as National Statuary Hall. And he... was taken off of the floor to a nearby office where he died that year. And that's been then one of those, one of the few members to have died in one of the chambers. And so that then has led to a lot of ghost stories about his lingering spirit, and maybe people hear him murmuring or preparing for a speech in the hall, or maybe they just see him, an apparition walking around in National Statuary Hall.
Ooh, this is what we're looking for, Dan. This is what we're looking for.
You may hear John Quincy Adams, but do you ever see Ghost Cat?
Ghost cat or demon cat, to make it even more scary, right?
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite stories.
Demon cat. So the first reports of the demon cat come in the late 19th century, and they peg it back to 1862 as the first. So in the story that they tell later, they say, oh, in 1862, a Capitol night watchman saw a black cat in the distance, and it started to walk towards them, and it grew in size, and its eyes were aglow, and then it jumped over the head of the Capitol watchman, and then all of a sudden it vanished. And this has been called since then the Demon Cat. And every now and again there's a new story. Maybe a Capitol security guard took a shot at the Demon Cat and missed. Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, but the paw prints are still there.
And then, so, I don't know which came, to the, what lends credence to the story, right, are those little paw prints outside the Supreme Court chamber in the small Senate rotunda. And that's not crazy that you would find those little paw prints, because they did, and you asked about that, they did have cats roaming around the basement of the Capitol in the 19th century, try to keep vermin under control.
Oh, okay.
So, you take these things, you put them together, real cats walking around in a dark, dimly lit building in the 19th century with these little paw prints showing up in the cement, and then you have all the ingredients for a great ghost story, the Demon Cat.
Yeah.
But the Capitol doesn't currently have cats here to keep vermin at bay.
No, we see a lot of dogs, being brought on leashes, but I don't think we have any more cats roaming the basement.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of vermin. Not of the animal type anymore.
Well,
I think Dan agrees. If you look into it, one of the other things about it was sightings are reported just before big negative events like the stock market crash of 1929 or the JFK assassination of 1963.
So being the skeptic that I am,
Yes.
This is one of those things that keeps getting added to the story. I don't know that anyone has ever said on the day, hey, I saw the Demon Cat today, and then next day something bad happened, but people like, you can add some more drama to the story if you start tacking on these details about when it appears.
We went over this morning, and I took 4 pictures of it, and in every picture there is a red splotchy floating light that showed up. Now our IT guy says it's probably a reflection of the camera, and I'll just say that's probably one theory there.
Okay.
I'm just saying. I'm just adding.
Or the eyes of the Demon Cat.
Yes.
Now, there is a legend of a shadow of a Civil War soldier in Statuary Hall. Is that something you're familiar with?
Yes. So once again, Statuary Hall, a lot of history took place there. Once the House of Representatives moved to its new chamber in the Capitol Extension in 1858, that space was not really used for anything for quite some time, but during the Civil War, it was a place where wounded soldiers convalesced. I don't know if people realize, but in general, the Capitol, when the Congress was out of session, this was essentially a station for Civil War soldiers. They were stationed here. They were sleeping in the rotunda. They moved large ovens into the basement to bake bread in order to feed all these soldiers. And in addition, some parts of the Capitol, including National Statuary Hall, acted as a makeshift hospital for some. And so ever since then, you get these stories of, maybe that some of the souls of some of those soldiers who didn't make it, maybe they remained in the Capitol, and so then you get these reports of apparitions walking around in the National Statuary Hall. You also get some of those stories on the location where the Supreme Court now stands. There was in a building called the Old Brick Capitol that had been used temporarily after Congress had to leave the Capitol because of the fire in 1814. By the Civil War, it was converted into a prison. So often you hear called the Old Capitol Prison. And so again, some of the reports you get are soldiers guarding the Old Capitol Prison, maybe in the middle of the night, who then, just vanished before your eyes and that kind of thing.
I didn't realize how many ghost stories were actually around here.
No, not at all.
Yeah, on the Senate side, another one that you hear about frequently, Vice President Henry Wilson, who had been a senator for many years, was one of the founding members of the Republican Party. He serves as vice president under Ulysses S. Grant, and he also has a stroke while he's in the Senate bathtubs in the basement of the Senate building. He gets brought up to the ceremonial vice president's office and tries to convalesce there for a number of days, but sadly he passed away in that office. And so once again, you hear these stories of, sightings of Henry Wilson returning from the bathtubs to make his way into that office, or sometimes people in the lobby outside the chamber, they talk about odd noises and coughing, and they look and find nobody there, and they think it's maybe the ghost of Henry Wilson.
There's so many Senate stories, but there's also a House story of a of an assassination that happened in the Capitol.
Yeah.
What happened over there in the Capitol?
So yeah, another, when there's a lot of distance, but when you look back at it, a very sad story. A journalist named Charles Kincaid had published some stories outing Congressman William Talby for having an affair. He effectively ends Talby's political career. Talby goes on to become a lobbyist, so he spends a lot of time in the Capitol. And for a good amount of time, he frequently runs into Charles Kincaid, who he obviously blames for, maybe ruining his political career. And during that time, he was not shy about maybe taunting Kincaid, maybe doing the old-fashioned things like pulling on his nose, which is, like a thing they would do to launch into a duel situation, kind of disrespectful to someone. Yeah. And Charles Kincaid, on one of those occasions, on the staircase leading down from the House of Representatives chamber, shot Talby. And now to this day, there are splotches on those marble stairs, which may be blood from that assassination attempt. I think if you ask the House curators, they'll tell you it's merely an imperfection in the marble that has been worn, that becomes more visible as it's been worn down. But I don't know. This one.
It could be the bloody staircase.
It could be the bloody staircase.
Wow.
It's more interesting to think of it as the bloody staircase.
Yeah.
And Kincaid, the reporter, was he a reporter at the time? I mean, he's just carrying a gun around on the Capitol?
Well, I think he decided that he was going to carry a gun because he wanted to protect himself from Talby. So he actually claimed self-defense in the killing and was acquitted.
A nose pull too far, possibly?
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Apparently, the little, I guess, stand your ground of the 19th century.
Oh my goodness. Let's see here. This and this is not great, anytime somebody dies, especially when you're working here. What about Pringle Slight?
Pringle Slight was Robert Slight was a master carpenter who was working at the Capitol in 1861 when the two extensions to the Capitol were being built, the Senate and House side. They also decided that the building needed a new dome to be more in proportion with the larger scale of the building.
Okay.
And so they had to remove the old wooden and copper dome, and they set up scaffolding to do that, and it was a very difficult job. Pringle Slight's son, Robert, was one of the individuals who worked on that project, and he sadly fell off of the dome while working on it and passed away. And so again, so that's right over the rotunda. And so again, when people are, recounting these ghost stories, maybe the ghost of Robert Slight is hanging out in the rotunda late at night.
Oh, wow.
Now, once somebody does pass away, there is a Congressional Cemetery. Some people may not even realize that exists. Can you tell us a little about the Congressional Cemetery? Yeah,
it's a really fascinating story, and the subject of our latest blog post on Senate Stories. So if anybody's on the Senate website,
how do you get there?
You go to senate.gov and look under About the Senate, and you will see Senate Stories.
Sweet.
And so we focused on that this month. It's a fascinating story because when L'Enfant designed the new capital city,
Pierre L'Enfant,
he neglected to plan for cemeteries. Obviously, this area was not uninhabited at that time. There were local family plots and church cemeteries, but there was no plan for a national cemetery. The city commissioners designated two areas on the eastern and western outskirts of the city to create a cemetery. The one on the eastern side was not in a really great spot. It was maybe too close to the river, and so it's not the place where you want to inter bodies. And a local church, Christ Church, which is just over here on Capitol Hill, parishioners there formed a cemetery in 1807, and eventually became under the control of Christ Church. And
so it's a different spot than the original planning?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. And so and the one that is there today.
Okay, gotcha.
It's Washington Parish Burial Ground is its formal name, but very soon thereafter it takes on the popular name of Congressional Cemetery or the Congressional Burial Ground, because some of the first people buried there are members of Congress. The first member of Congress buried there was Senator Uriah Tracy in 1807. In the 18 teens, you get vice presidents get buried there. Elbridge Gerry and George Clinton are both buried there. And at some point, the owners of the cemetery they donate burial plots to Congress and their families. and it's not completely selfless that they're doing this. They're kind of looking for maybe some financial support to upkeep the cemetery, which is very costly, and that actually works out well for them.
So although aptly named Congressional Cemetery, you don't have to be a congressman to be buried there.
Nope, it was it was a public burial ground. It was open to all. There were even sections of the cemetery that would accept African Americans, which was a little maybe unusual at the time, even though it was segregated. So initially you had not just members of Congress, but just all kinds of folks associated with the Capitol. So one of I think the first individual buried there right after it was created was a Mason who worked on building the Capitol in that period. So in addition to members of Congress, you get also the first Sergeant at Arms of the Senate is there, Mathers, James Mathers. The first Secretary of the Senate, Samuel Otis, is buried there, and other folks who worked in the Senate as messengers and pages and doorkeepers are buried there in the 19th century.
So interesting. There are 171 unusual blocky markers. What do those commemorate?
So in 1815, Congress is starting to realize that this is going to be the place where members of Congress are going to be buried when they die in office in Washington. Partly that's because embalming practices aren't such that they could really send bodies back home after they pass away, and so there's the need to find a local burial ground for them, and this becomes Congressional Cemetery. So as that starts to take place, in 1815, Capitol architect Benjamin Latrobe is asked to design some kind of marker to kind of set off the congressional burial plots from the larger cemetery, and he designs these very large block monuments that have a little kind of cone at the top, and they're made out of the same sandstone that they used to build the Capitol at that time.
Oh, wow.
And so every time a member dies, they get put there. By the mid-19th century, embalming practices are improved. Many members who die in office are being sent back home for burial, but they still want to mark their service and their passing in Washington at Congressional Cemetery. So they continue to put these large markers there, but there's no body underneath them. So they begin to take on the name cenotaph, which just means empty tomb. To this day, there's dozens of them that don't have a body in them. They're all kind of referred to as cenotaphs, but not all of them have actual interred members.
Now, what's the condition of the cemetery? Was it always pristine from when it started up until now?
After Congress created Arlington National Cemetery after the Civil War, Congressional Cemetery really lost its place as kind of the national burial ground. Okay. And it starts a long process of deterioration. There's some efforts to improve it and keep it up to shape. There's still important individuals get buried there in the 20th century, like John Philip Sousa, the famed composer, or Matthew Brady, the famed Civil War photographer. In the 1970s, J. Edgar Hoover is buried there because he was a Washington native. But the condition of the cemetery goes all downhill until the 1970s, when there's some efforts that begin to kind of restore it to its past glory. But that's a very slow process, and it really takes volunteers from Washington and the surrounding neighborhoods to really kind of get the movement going to start to take care of it again. Members of the armed services are really important help in that sense too. They have an annual day of service where they came and help just repair headstones,
nice.
Clean graffiti, just mow the lawn and that kind of thing. And finally, when you get into more recent years, in the last 15, 20 years, Congress creates an endowment to help upkeep the cemetery. And it's now been restored to really not just a cemetery, but a central community space. I think they screen movies there from time to time, and they hold events, and you can get married in the chapel that is on the grounds of the Congressional Cemetery. So while you might seem odd to have all these gatherings in a cemetery, a spooky place, it's actually a very vibrant community space now, which is really nice, I think.
Maybe a bit morbid to get married in a cemetery. I would do it, but one of my wife's favorite movies is The Nightmare Before Christmas, so maybe we're a little odd. Can anybody go visit if they're in Washington nowadays?
Oh, definitely. And I highly encourage it. And there's tours there, especially around the Halloween season. I believe they do ghost story tours.
Ooh.
I hope that's true because I just said that. But yes, it is open to the public to visit, and it's really, it's a very historical place. and even if there are no ghosts up and walking around, you can still, I think, get a great feeling of the long history of Congress in being there.
So, Dan, your primary focus is probably not ghosts.
Not usually, but we get in our office, we get pulled in all kinds of directions, whatever someone is interested in.
That's what I'm wondering.
We are happy to find out what we can.
You're going through everything, and these are just popping up over time.
Yeah, there's like this periodic story that winds up in newspapers where they kind of start to revisit these, and each time there's a new person telling the story, or there's a new story that it was like I said, a night watchman or a cleaning person or a Capitol policeman who happened to run into these apparitions. And in some ways it's not surprising, right? Because especially if you think about the late 19th century before electrification, the building is going to be dark. It's going to be lit with dimly lit gas lighting, right? It's made of stone almost entirely, so noises are going to ricochet and echo. There was one story about a Capitol policeman in the late 19th century whose colleagues decided to play a trick on him over in National Statuary Hall, making, clinking their nightsticks against things and then having him run out to find nobody there and then being terrified that he's just in the presence of a ghost. I think they had a good laugh when he came back and swore that he had heard something. But it's not surprising. You think about the space and think about it at night and how quiet. Every noise that happens there must be kind of a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah. They actually pulled a trick on me. I think it was my second year here. So we were over in the Capitol filming for the State of the Union, and they told me that you could still see burn marks under the Capitol, and they had a little door in one of these rooms. The general public can't go into this. So they had me go down, and then they locked me in there for 5 minutes, and it was pitch black.
Whoa!
Yeah. And they told me that, actually I just remembered this, that they thought occasionally the ghost of one of the former presidents would appear. Have you ever heard that story?
John Quincy Adams?
So one was John Quincy Adams that you've heard about. There's also some of these things, these stories pop up and then they kind of go away. So like another one that popped up was the idea. So the original plan for the Capitol was that George Washington would be entombed beneath the crypt, right? And there might be a statue there marking his grave. And so I read at least one report in a newspaper about somebody saying, oh, maybe there was the ghost of George Washington hanging out in the crypt and and vanishing without a trace.
I think that's who I was supposed to be careful of. He didn't do anything to me, so that's great.
Yeah.
Any final stories you want to share, Dan?
There was a couple other Senate ghosts that I didn't mention.
Okay.
One of them involved Senator John Logan, who had been a general during the both going back to the Mexican War and then was very influential Republican during the Civil War, and he was chair of the Military Affairs Committee. And there was told that if you were hanging around the Military Affairs Committee room at exactly 12:30, that the door would open and you would see the ghost of Senator Logan walking down the hall. And you had to watch out for that, and then he would just vanish.
Disappear.
Someone claimed to see the Senator Boyce Penrose was in his final years, or maybe final year, was in a wheelchair, and some people claim to have seen his ghost in the Capitol in his wheelchair. And also, you probably heard the noise of the wheels going. Nothing creepier than a ghost wheelchair.
That is creepy. I don't think I'm going to tempt that Logan sighting at all.
Not at 12:30 p.m.
No. Dan, anything else?
There's there's these little stories that come and go. I would say that to spoil the fun of a good ghost story, right, is that these things almost never are told when they happen, right? They're always recounted later, and sometimes there's quotes and interviews with people, and but then the stories, they grow over time, and then they're just kind of recycled over and over again.
Yeah.
Although, to say that, I believe Senator Leahy, when he moved into his hideaway office in the Capitol, there was reason to believe that it had been an office of Daniel Webster, and I think some of his staff in more recent years were a little concerned that maybe they heard some mysterious noises, and they wondered if the ghost of Daniel Webster was still stalking the Capitol. So, some of these stories are really old, but new ones sometimes get added to the list and they get recycled again.
There's something there. There is something there. Well, Dan Holt, thank you so much for humoring us today and putting up with us. I know we're all a little skeptical, but there's something there. These just keep popping up.
Yeah. And, and like I said, the Capitol is it's a historic space. And just, I imagine people's imaginations go in the night, maybe get run away with them a little bit, and yeah, so it can be a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun to be scared sometimes. So
absolutely. I want to give you one more chance to tell people if they're coming down here to visit. Is there anything you think is interesting to see? I'm sure you think a ton is interesting. You're an historian.
Well, yeah. So if you're going to the CVC, one thing I will plug is the exhibition hall at the CVC.
Capitol Visitor Center.
There's no ghosts in there, but it's a newly.
So it's a safe space.
It's a safe space, and it's a newly redesigned, just opened last year, museum space, and it's beautiful, and it's up to date, and it has a lot of hard work went into it. So I encourage everybody to go there. You won't find ghosts, but you'll find a lot of good history. And then I would say, look for little clues when you're in the Capitol. If you're in the rotunda, for example. People come in and they all look up at the beautiful ceiling, the apotheosis of Washington.
Yeah.
But one of the things we do on our tours is we ask people to look down when they're around the middle of the room, because you'll see little remnants of history. So one of those things you'll see are little dark squares in a little circle around the middle of the rotunda. And what that is left from is the hole that had once been in the rotunda, so that you could look down upon the statue and on the remains of George Washington. And there was a wrought iron fence, right, that covered that, so nobody fell down that hole.
Yeah.
And so they ultimately filled that hole in the 1820s, when the plan to have Washington reinterred here fell through. But that's the kind of thing, when you're in the Capitol, you see these weird little evidence of the history. So obviously, I don't know if they can go over to the bloody stairs on the House side, but if you leave the old Supreme Court chamber, look down and you can see the paw prints. It's right when you exit that space, you can see those.
Take a picture, see if you see a red light.
Yeah.
Demon cat.
Green eyes.
Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great. I had fun. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening.
And happy Halloween.
Like and subscribe. No tricks, just treats. We'll be back next week on our regular schedule of every other week releases. The Elephant in the Room is brought to you under the direction of Senator John Bat Rasso from Wyoming. Executive producer Arjun Gooley. Show producer Carly Rapture is coming. And I'm Cyrus Fearsome. Until next time, this has been The Elephant in the Room.